Hey, Barnaby. Welcome to CTO Wisdom.
Hi, great to be here.
Could you give me the elevator pitch of yourself, please?
Sure, I am a serial chief product and technology officer. Been doing it for 25, 30 years. Grew up, sort of cut my teeth at early Amazon, worked on everything from the first version of the Amazon marketplace to core search technology, recommendations, personalization, and a few things in the middle. And then since then, I've spent just decades in early stage startups and then more recently kind of scale ups. So kind of going from 10, 20 million in annual recurring revenue up into north of 100 million. A lot of that in the HR space, HR information, human resources, but a lot of experience with media as well, and really take an integrative approach between product design engineering, and then also just as a C-suite executive, kind of the connection between the tech org and the rest of the company is something that I've really been leaning into in the latter years.
Awesome. Could you tell us about your journey to becoming an exec? So maybe go back to when you're a manager, you choose which point you want to do. What was that like? And what did you learn about at that point of your career?
Sure. I mean, it's a constant evolution, and in some ways, be hard to pick a single point. But I guess I would say I would pick a couple things. One, I went to business school. I have an MBA, and I think that really creates a lot of the foundation for what you need. People ask me frequently today if I still think it's relevant, and I use things that I learned in business school from decades ago on a daily basis. So I think that's a foundational piece. But I think again back to my time I wound up at Amazon as part of an acquisition. I was essentially in the C-suite of a small startup that and then wound up at Amazon. But Amazon was very small, and I mean I think there were maybe 200 people in corporate in Seattle at the time. Most, if not the whole time I was there, about 7 years, my managers reported to Jeff Bezos. So while I wasn't in the C-suite as a C-level executive, I was physically present, so kind of in the room where it happens, if you will. And I got to see incredibly smart people figuring it out as they went because they were also junior and doing it for the first time. And in some ways kind of catch up to the industry and in some ways go beyond and invent new things, like some of the things that are pretty famous about Amazon today. It was amazing to watch them unfold and unfurl. That was kind of a step function. Then I would say, if I jump forward, was in a number of smaller startups where the difference between being an individual contributor and a C-level executive was not that great. But then when I got into kind of again these scale ups where we went from tens or 100 people to hundreds of people and tens or sub 10 million in revenue to over 100 million, that's where I really learned kind of what it takes to be that connective tissue that becoming a C-level executive requires.
Okay, so when you think about your management journey, what are some of the
Mm-hmm.
powerful things before you got to C-suite that you learned along the way?
I think a lot of it was around pitching my ideas. One of the things that I love about software development is everything's possible. The feasible region, if you will, of what can be done is essentially infinite. But the problem with that is that, it's if you're talking about, oh, I want to build a bridge or I want to build a building, it's kind of the set of things that are possible is much more limited by physics and, you know, history of architecture, things like that. But tech is so unlimited. And so one of the things I struggled with early on was having these ideas and communicating them and basically selling my ideas, selling myself and my ideas. And frankly, I think showing up in a way that was, emotionally intelligent. And I think early on, even though I was right about some things that turned out to be absolutely massive monster businesses over time, I did not present that in a way that helped other people understand, sort it relative to all the other great ideas, because the whole thing is just exploding in the early web. So that's a kind of a really important piece. And I mean, an example of that would be again the Amazon Marketplace, which was very controversial internally, and you can understand why you have an established business selling books, and suddenly you want third parties to sell books and treat your customers as well as you would, and not mess up your relationship with publishers. But the way that we were going about it, frankly, wasn't working because we had them separate. And again, I just got frustrated, and I just like expected people to see things the way I saw them. And it's really been kind of in growing and learning that, hey, everybody's doing their best. Almost all the time, all people are trying to do their best work and the best thing for, not just themselves, but their company, their team. And if you can find ways of relating to them and figuring out what are their objections, and they may just be right. It's the other thing. You may be wrong. Your idea may not work. But I guess to some, it's really around being better at also just using metrics and analytics to present in a very objective way, and then really getting into the shoes of the person that I need to get buy-in from, rather than just sort of wanting to shake them and say, can't you see it?
So yeah, what I heard was like you went from here's the idea, and you get a resounding silence, to what are the people I'm trying to convince? Who are they? What do they want? What do they need? What convinces them, whether it be metrics, and improving that influencing capability.
Absolutely. Yeah, good summary.
Cool. Okay, so you've kind of like building up this skill set, you're becoming a manager, and then you eventually get to managing of managers. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations for people that are like getting to manage managers for the first time?
That's a good question. People usually ask me about managing for the first time, but managing managers, I think it really is. You have to think, you have to lead through more layers of abstraction, right? Like you can't influence people directly, especially as the org gets larger. If you're managing hundreds of, have an organization with hundreds of people and managers of managers reporting into you, the ability to kind of stand next to somebody and help them through a problem, or work with them directly, basically goes away. There's just not enough time in the day or the week. So you really have to think about how you can simplify even more. I mean, simplification is always important, but I think that, again, if I can stand there face to face and explain my half-baked idea, and have you ask questions till we get there, that's one way of working with somebody as a manager. Or the inverse, they're half-baked ideas and you're helping them get it fully baked. But once you get into the managing managers realm, now communication becomes harder and something you have to be much more thoughtful about and put more effort into. I like to say that transparency, which I believe is super important, is not the opposite of keeping secrets. Transparency, requires effort. You have to work at it. You have to craft the message. You have to think about the delivery mechanism, the timing, the audience. And all of these things become much, much more important. I think everything around communication becomes a much bigger issue. I think one of the advantages that people should lean into is now you actually have a portfolio. You're essentially working with a portfolio of talent versus a toolbox of talent. I think, and if you think about kind of investment theory, that diversification is almost always a benefit if in a stock portfolio. Same thing with a talent portfolio, and how you think about how you balance that, and you think about the makeup of that talent pool, and how well it meets the needs of the organization, the strategy, the various stakeholders. There's kind of this much more zoomed out view that you have to take and think about sort of how the pieces all fit together, and be planning, thoughtful about that. I think, as an example, having a strategy for hiring. I've scaled engineering product tech teams from single digits, into triple digits, or, very fast growth at times. And, we're depending on where we are in the cycle. And I've made some terrible mistakes. Like one of the ones that I've really been leaning into, now for quite some time is just thinking hard about the ratio of senior to junior. And at one company where we got a funding round and, we're expected to grow the team and do some acquisitions and some integrations and just tons of growth. I was strongly encouraged by a variety of stakeholders that I should hire a bunch of senior folks, particularly in engineering. And so I did that, and they all wanted the title of architect. So I had a front-end architect and a back-end architect and a mid-tier architect and a lunch architect, and like everybody was an architect. And and then eventually they all fought, like cats in a bag. I mean, it was not a good situation because so often with technology, there isn't a right architecture. More important than anything, it's everybody's agreed on and following the patterns that have been set forth. And if you've got 3 or 4 or 5 people who believe it's their job to define those patterns, you wind up in a really bad place. And so I think being very thoughtful about that ratio of junior to senior, and always role clarity is super important. It's important at all levels, but again, if you've got a larger organization, having good, clean lines of separation of who owns what, where is the separation between two orgs or two teams? Because if there's a lot of overlap, you wind up with a lot of problems, and if there's no overlap, you wind up with a lot of problems. So you want you want them sort of adjacent or touching shoulders, but not trying to sit in the same chair.
So you talked about the ratio of like overemploying in terms of senior and that having a lot of architects. So what do you actually use as a basis now? Because obviously the implicit of what you're saying is that you should hire juniors as well as seniors. How do you think about that now?
It really depends on what you're building, where you are in kind of the life cycle of the technology, the company. So if you're earlier stage or you're building completely new stuff, that you're going to need to start with some senior people who can design and architect. If you're just maintaining something, you probably don't need an architect. And everybody always in this business wants to, kind of be moving quickly and changing and replacing. And sometimes it's just not the right thing for the business or in the marketplace. So if something is in maintenance mode or, some other kind of mode, say lots of integrations and connections with third parties is another thing that I've experienced. Again, you don't really need to be building stuff whole cloth, and you don't need architects. But also, if you've got a lot of serious tech debt or a need to evolve a product because of some technical innovation, I mean, artificial intelligence, large language models are, huge right now, and they are going to impact a lot of businesses, and they are going to require reworking and refactoring many, many, many applications. So those are some examples of places where, again, I think you'd lean into some more senior folks. I will say also, there are for a number of reasons, I believe that more junior people are more capable than they ever have been. And that's not a slight against more senior people and their unique abilities, but I think the change. So there's a few things that have happened. One, the knowledge base that's available online, not in books. Remember those big thick Q books that we were expected to read to learn how to use Excel? Yeah, right behind you. It's sound insulation now, right?
Yeah.
And so that's all available online. And now also with like a ChatGPT, you can actually sort of interrogate that knowledge base in ways you never could before. So that's what's available from a knowledge perspective has really come a long ways and continues to accelerate. Then I would say also the tool set, right? Like the number of, low code, no code, cloud, when a new software development engineer sits down at their desk for the first time, they are empowered with a master skill level set of tools on day one. And that's also a change. And I think within that is also some architectural processes things. So, continuous employment, continuous, CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. It is something, and then also kind of like the ability to launch things, into a branch on production, but behind a feature flag so that it's internal users only testers, and then do a canary release where the number of external users ramps from 0 to 1, not up to 100%, means that whereas say 20 years ago, a new grad out of a software development engineering program, computer science program, might be expected to spend months learning, the architecture and the custom tools and language modifications and the business before they check in any code that goes to production. Also, the development and deployment cycles were much longer. Now, I believe in a lot of companies like Meta, I think, you're expected to check in code to production on day one. And so all of that means that I think you can, if you're thinking about that portfolio of talent I mentioned, you can get a lot more done with more junior people than you used to. The ratios of like sort of straight out of school, one to say, 3 or 5 years, 5 to 8 or 10, 10 to 15, and then more senior. I think you can get a lot more done with more people at the junior end than you could before.
Yeah. And to add to that, and I think you included this, there's so much better tooling that we don't have so much complexity that we used to have. And we don't need to create everything custom.
Right.
Okay, so managing managers, you talked about transparency. You talked about getting the right ratio of junior and seniors, considering the context of the business and what the business needs. Heard that all. What else would you say is important for helping managers managing managers?
I think it's your role as connective tissue to other parts of your organization. And I tend to think of these things as in concentric circles, right? So one of the ways that I just sort of describe career progression to people, especially young people out of school, is it's a little bit like dropping a pebble in a pond, right? You're the pebble, and when the pebble first drops, there's that one little circle, and that's your first year, out of school, and then over time, those rings go out and out and out, and by the time you're at the C-suite, you've reached the edges of the pond, all edges, right? Like you're touching everything. Your wrinkles and the energy that you put out reaches the whole organization. So as you're in that journey, think about kind of where you are. And so let's say you're a new manager of managers. You've got one sort of skip level below your direct reports, and you're one of, say, 5 direct reports to a VP or a C-level executive, or a sort of senior director. You need to really think about how you help your teams, assuming that each manager you manage represents an individual team. How are they connecting with each other? What mechanisms have you created for them to be aligned, have transparency with each other, hold each other accountable, celebrate each other's successes, all of those things. Then, and that's kind of your oversight within your group of people that you manage. Then there's, okay, now I, as a manager of, as a senior manager or maybe a director level, how do I effectively connect with my peers within, all the people that report to my manager? So I really like the idea of the first team. The author Patrick Lencioni, I think he introduced, that's where I learned it. It's the notion that your first team is not the people who report to you, or in this case, the managers that you manage, but it's actually your peers who report into your manager, and you're accountable. Your success is dependent on their success, and vice versa. And so, making sure that you have really good collegial, hopefully friendship level relationships with those folks, because the alignment or lack thereof is what's going to determine the success of your immediate organization and your manager's success, the organization, that success. And then I think you start thinking about, okay, where else in the organization do I need to be connecting? So, I think like relationships between tech org and product marketing, sales, support, sometimes legal, are kind of notoriously not great. And I think that one of the things that as people start to move up, they can have a very positive impact on, but they can also learn for themselves is, how do I effectively, and in a positive way, with as much emotional intelligence as I can, engage with those other functions, so that, let's say legal, for example, you're going through GDPR issues, or, other maybe, contractual kinds of things. IT and security can be another area of either friction or wonderful collaboration. But like building a relationship, understanding, why the legal department has created, whatever structures it has, why they think it's important that I do or not do these things. and just really show up and be present to understand kind of things from their perspective. On the support side, I think that's an area that if you don't have a good relationship with the support org, you're not going to have quality software. In my experience, like they're the tip of the spear of where so many of the quality problems that our users, our customers are experiencing comes in contact. And if we all just, I mean, think about for yourself, like how upset and angry and frustrated you have to be before you file a ticket, right? Like most of us just, because it's so painful it's so many organizations. So by the time somebody's actually filed a ticket, um, they've already gotten to a level of frustration. And if the support org is saying, and I'm getting a lot of these, or I'm having to do these workarounds to help our customers or whatever, I think it's really important to really listen to that and be extremely empathetic and try everything you can to fully understand what the issue is and not fall into the temptation of, people just don't understand or don't know how to use it or whatever it is, or you need to do a better job of explaining it. And just think about how can you incorporate that into your daily work, monthly work, your planning, et cetera. And again, finding that balance, because back to the point about in software, the possibilities are endless. So are the demands, right? And so you leveraging, and I think, I don't think, I know software development engineers, programmers, they like building high quality software. They don't like bugs. And one of, I've seen relationships go from, oh, we just, the support org just doesn't get it, to, oh, the support org gives me the data that I need to be able to then go work with my product managers, my business stakeholders, whoever it is, and say, hey, I know that you think that feature would be really cool, but we've got a large number of users who are actually trying to use this feature we built that they want and they like, but it doesn't work correctly because there is a bug or there's an exception or whatever it is. I'm gonna put time and resources into fixing this or making this better before I build that new thing that you're excited about. And there's a lot you can talk about how to manage that, but there's an interplay, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, between the interactions and the data and anecdotes that you get back from other organizations. And I just chose support as one to focus on, but sales is another, marketing, product marketing is another, finance, living in your budget. That's another one that I think is like just deer in headlights for a lot of first-time managers in particular, where now you're actually allocating things like dollars between teams and people in a much more expansive and dynamic way, and so your partnership with finance can become a really important part of your role.
So setting up a community for your peers is an important thing, so you can learn from each other, give each other feedback, and also expanding beyond technology into the other departments to understand, one, what are they doing, why are they doing it, building empathy for them, and then also building stronger relationships is the kind of things. And customer success is like obviously the one that you primarily used, and I 100% agree with you. They are the best bug hunters because your consumers are finding things. So that's great. So, and also the first team mentality. So moving to your first team move. So you're now in the exec. What was that transition like for you, if you can remember it? And what are the important things to think about when you're in the VP role before you got to the CTO role?
Yeah, I a bunch of failures, I guess, ranging from just, again, not doing a good job of building bridges. And, there's a thing that happens a lot in tech, which is that tech debt builds up, technology moves on, and I think the human instinct is you sort of out with the old, in with the new, and like let's do spring cleaning, and we're going to do we're going to go from V1 to V2, and that also used to be how software was built, right? When we had to put it onto disks and mail it out to people, you had multi-year development cycles because you couldn't test, you didn't know what people were doing or how they were using it, and you couldn't fix bugs once they went out. So you just really had to go, slow and steady. The web is just not like that. But I think kind of this notion that it's time to just rip and replace is something that I've embraced and failed at several times. I've resisted and failed in being effective at communicating the why. And so I think that I'm thinking about it as an example of places where I had conflict or lack of alignment with other people within, or other VPs, and either didn't succeed in what I was doing or caused general failure to spread. And it really just again comes down to relationships. I think, just being really really thoughtful about my interpersonal relationships. And in some ways, I'm repeating kind of what it was as I went from. But it just gets more important as you go. And I'm trying to think of other things that sort of definitively change. Well, your time horizons change a lot. I guess that's something I haven't mentioned yet. I think that you tend to. You're an individual contributor. Your head's down, focused on what I'm doing today, and kind of what's expected of me, this sprint. And I'm probably curious about the company strategy and what's going on and stuff, but I don't really pay that much attention unless there's a really healthy, well-developed OKR quarterly kind of system. But most of my day-to-day is like focused on the here and now. And then as you move up, you're thinking, you're responsible for, if you've really leaned into Agile, 2-week sprints, you're sort of, that's, like the last sprint and sort of this sprint, and maybe you're thinking about next sprint, right? So that's kind of a 6-week spread, if you will. I think that, then once you become kind of a VP level, you tend to think about like quarterly OKRs, quarterly QBRs, quarterly business reviews. And then, once you get into the C-suite, or kind of go further, then now you tend to think about, there's an annual planning cycle that you spend months on. There's, kind of mid-year review, and, there's an annual planning, budgeting, the budget planning becomes that frame that you work inside of. And then you also tend to worry about things, at a strategic level out, 3-5 years. Hopefully you're in an organization that does that kind of thoughtful stuff at least every couple of years. Is kind of, I think people tend to work on their strategy too often, and don't give enough time to execute, which tends to lead to a little too much context switching. But a thoughtful balance of really long term, where is this company going to be, in 20 years? If that's an appropriate frame. It isn't always, but somebody like that was something that I've definitely learned from Jeff Bezos, and he's pretty famous / infamous for that long-term thinking. But yeah, those time horizons expand, and the amount of time you spend thinking about working on producing work product, analytics, frameworks, documents, presentations that spreads over a longer period and is more forward-looking is a big piece of it. I think also metrics. If you're building software, you're responsible for some dashboards and monitoring services or those kinds of things, but typically you're not looking at a larger, broader dashboard and the connectivity again between unit sales or subscriptions and things like churn and average revenue per user and customer acquisition cost and hosting cost and cost of goods, everything that goes into cost of goods sold, cost of headcount, the biggest chunk of all the budgets that I've managed, in CP, CTO roles. and then again, the connectivity of that to profitability. And then typically, whether it's a startup or a PE backed company, and I've been in both, you do have some sort of a horizon, a event, an exit, a sale that you're thinking about. And you may be actively working on that, or you just may be like, we just got acquired by a PE. And so we know their average hold period is 4 or 5 years. So, they're going to come in and there's going to be an immediate action plan. And then there's going to be a next series of years of execution. And then we're going to get it ready for sale. And for where you are in that cycle. But again, these longer time horizons, there's a few examples of how that can work that I think becomes part of your day to day as you get more senior.
So when you think about it, Barnaby, what does success look like for you, and what has helped you be successful?
I think for me, I'm economically rational. I have trouble getting that out. I'm economically rational, so I care about money. But I've also realized that if you spend a lot of time thinking about it or worrying about it, you're probably not actually going to be successful in making a lot of money. Most of the really wealthy people that I know don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about what it takes to make money or how they made the money or how to make more money. They think about, how do I create value in the world? And so for me, whereas money and title maybe were more important to me, now it's really, am I creating value? And am I creating value on probably two primary vectors? One is just for customers in the world. I'm highly customer centric. And so am I building, improving, creating, maintaining, whatever it is, a product solution that large numbers of people, find valuable, impacts their lives in positive ways, reduces some pain somehow, makes things easier for them, helps them cut costs or be more successful. The other vector is, how well am I doing internally in terms of having happy, healthy employees who are in themselves being successful in however they define it, whatever their goals are, their growth. The fundamentals, the Maslow's hierarchy stuff of, can I feed myself and take care of my family? And then, up into self-actualization of like, that classic thing that a lot of engineers hit, which is, I really love coding, but I've been at it for 12 years, and I'm getting asked to manage a team, and I'm not sure if I want to, and how can I and so I'm at that fork in the road, and how can I help them through that, which can be scary and lead to people leaving companies because of that can be handled poorly, or it can lead to I've seen people step into leadership who were kind of resistant to it and didn't think it was for them, and they've blossomed and been incredibly successful at it. I've seen people who you would think, because of their personality, they seem sort of outgoing, gregarious, whatever. Turns out, nope. You know what? Their best use is sitting at a keyboard most of the day, coding. And I've seen hybrids, and I've seen people, but I've also seen people leave companies because of how that transition was handled, or how the need to go sort of back the other direction was handled. So that's a little bit of a deep dive into my definition of success is really the success of my organization, and again, like I said earlier, not just the people that report up into me or who are in my immediate or team, but also if engineering is doing great but sales can't sell anything, or they're not hitting their quotas, it doesn't that doesn't work. So it's how well is the collective doing.
And what's helped you be successful?
Well, I would say mistakes and failure and learning from them. That's always really, really important. I think curiosity, just be curious, and if you don't know the answer to something, maybe also being a little bit impatient to get an answer. And sometimes that's just a Google search, but sometimes there is no answer. Nobody's ever thought of the question, because nobody's been in the situation you're in. Having been working in internet-powered technologies since well, a really long time, in my life, but a very short period in sort of the span of human history. Um, there's just I've been lucky to be on, kind of out at the front of the frontier of so many things, and so often there is no answer. The only way to get an answer is to do an experiment and explore and try new things that nobody's ever done before. So I think back to the question of what makes me successful is I seek that out. If somebody tells me, "Hey, go do this," and I'm like, "That's a solved problem." Like, you know, there are lots and lots of people who've done that, probably done it better than me. I'm not going to gravitate towards that. I'm going to gravitate more towards the thing that is like nobody's ever done it, probably isn't going to work, but if it does, you can change the world. And that's part of that curiosity thing. Um, I think a few other things that come to mind are really, really focusing on sort of the human side of things. I think a lot of engineers consider themselves to be highly analytical and that they make decisions based on data and facts. They also tend to be more introverted than extroverted, sort of on the spectrum. On that spectrum, they tend to, sort of trend towards that side. And what I've seen is that can lead to somebody who thinks that they are a non-emotional creature, um, and then they sort of deny their feelings about a thing, about, hey, that reorg was the fifth this year and I don't even understand why I'm building what I'm building, or they just promoted this guy who's been sitting next to me for 2 months, just joined the company 2 months ago, and I've been here for 2 years and I have more experience and I don't understand it, and whatever it is. And I think as a result, they can often bottle up some of the emotions and feelings about how things are going, and then it can explode in a non-productive way. So being really, really thoughtful about the people. And I think, listen, I have this sort of working hypothesis right now that um, we've as an industry created so many of the building blocks, foundational technologies, ways of working, infrastructure. We can rely on high speed, ubiquitously available bandwidth pretty much anywhere on the planet now. We don't have to buy expensive software to build software. The open source, operating systems and frameworks, cloud computing. We don't have to rack hardware, have people get up in the middle of the night to switch out hard drives. I mean, I can keep going. I think mobile, and now the Gen AI is kind of that next step function of building blocks. And yet, based on despite all of that, most applications, most web applications, mobile applications are mediocre at best. And there's some good ones that drag up the average, sort of namely the big tech companies. Not that they don't still have their usability problems, but you get to the average bank, airline, government, school, hospital website, and it can be almost impossible to get basic stuff done. And why is that? Well, the why is it still requires human beings to be aligned, um, focused on the customer, heading in the same direction, with upon ways of working and executing. And that's still really hard. And so back to the question of why am I successful is I've put a lot of time into focusing on how to help a team really do the thing, those things, have that customer focus, and it'd be a whole other series of podcasts really probably to share a lot of the little things that I've learned through trial and error and adopted from other people that make the difference. And I do think it's also worth noting that so much of what is traditional, instinctual, and intuitive does not work when it comes to software development and the web and usability and design and those kinds of things. And so if you just rely on sort of human intuition, that's why a lot of these websites don't work.
I think
because
you
that's what
also
people do.
I think that a lot of people have cognitive biases that they don't know how to manage them, like categorization. Mm-hmm. We love to categorize things, label things, and that's not always helpful, and actually can cause more problems. So thank you for that. So thinking about what are you seeing in the wider tech market today?
I think there are a number of things that are worth noting. I mean, I think so. Obviously, Gen AI, super hot topic. I think that it is in a place that's similar to, like what happened, let's say, with cloud computing, whatever, however long, 15, 20 years ago, that really started, where the hype exceeded the reality for some initial period. And then there was a little bit of a like, hey, you know what? Marketers are just putting that name on something that's not really a cloud. There's nothing cloud about that, whatever. This is, a lot of people concluded wrongly that it really was just fluff. In the long run, cloud truly represented a step function in the way that we um, do our work. And I would say that the long term impact has exceeded the initial hype. I think that where we're at right now, I mean, ChatGPT is 14 months old. Um, the hype last year was, massive. The hype now is massive, but I'm starting to see people like, oh, it's not really that big a deal or whatever. And, and we have yet to see the killer app beyond ChatGPT, right? Like in terms of something that's really, really changing the world. I think we're going to see some killer apps before the end of this calendar year. And I think it's going to be, in a variety of areas, but for example, customer service and chatbots, replacing the Mad Libs chatbots with something that actually could be better than humans, because you've trained it on all of your documentation, your actual code, every single support ticket you've ever had. That chatbot powered by an LLM is going to do better than somebody who had, maybe a few days of training, in a culture different than where the user is, et cetera. So that's something I'm excited about, like lots of people, but that's kind of my thought. Those are my thoughts on where that thing is. I think the other is we're in an interesting place. There were obviously a lot of layoffs last year. We've seen, I think a lot of people thought, okay, that's over, but then we've seen a bunch more this year. Some of it tied to a transition from kind of shutting down things that weren't actually working. I mean, you just think about like how big Alexa, the Alexa team was at Amazon, that, and the equivalent, at Google and Siri at Apple, that just completely missed the boat and did not, get it done relative to what the LLMs are capable of doing. So there's thousands of people who were toiling away on things that were pointing in the wrong direction. And I think, we had, I mean, I've been through enough recessions that, like, I remember the dot-com bubble burst, very, very vividly. And that was a long, slow slog back. And then the Great Recession, again, a pretty long, slow slog back. And then we didn't really have any sort of a correction as an industry, or an economy, since say 2012-ish up until kind of last year. And these things where companies would just hire up massive teams to prevent competitors from getting them, and then they'd have them doing work that was of questionable internal value. So I think this correction was needed. Ultimately, will be healthy, but it's also led to a lot of froth in the marketplace. I currently am, kind of doing some advisory work and kind of part-time fractional CTO type jobs. So talking to a lot of people, and I company after company, I see, they're on LinkedIn, premium, they've got the insights graph, and, the hiring curve is basically an inverted V over and over and over again. I see, it went from 200 to 400 down to 250 or some version of that, at whatever scale. And, I talked to a CEO recently who, product that I've used, they raised a bunch of money kind of in that during the pandemic, sort of everything's shifting to online, everything's got to be automated more so than before. And just this displacement caused money to flow in new directions. And so this company was the benefactor of that, raised lots of money, got a unicorn status valuation. And the CEO is like, I spent $80 million, dollars on, basically development, over a period, and I have essentially nothing to show for it. Can you come help me figure out why and how I fix it? And I think there's a lot of that out there, and just general kind of froth. around what kinds of people do I need? What are the market opportunities with Gen AI? And how do I adapt to the sort of new environment? And again, trends are trends, right? Like the trend, there. I've been in a board meeting where an investor said, "I just invested a huge amount of money, and it's not for you to earn interest." Well, at the time, interest rates were basically zero, and everything was about growth. I guarantee you that same investor's like, "I want to see your layoff plan. If you don't need to spend it, you can get 5% on your money." So you got to sort of play with what is happening in the environment today. And so those are some of the dynamics that we're dealing with. And as interest rates come down, that will change the dynamics of investment and the funding environment. I guess that's another piece that I would mention, is that a lot of folks maybe aren't as fully keyed into, is when interest rates are essentially zero, high net worth individuals, retirement funds, sovereign funds from governments, et cetera, they pour their money into private equity, even though private equity, the top end, they might be returning 20, 30% per year. The middle tier is going to be 10, 12, and the bottom quartile, can be 5% or below. And so when you can get 5 or 6 or even higher percent risk-free without also the long-term commitment, because those funds, you're getting in that for 5, 10 plus years, 5's quick, 10 years. The risk-reward ratio is out of whack. And so much of what we all live on in the tech industry is the flow of investment from VC and PE. But I think, because inflation is moderated, what so many people are counting on, betting on, is that interest rates will come down this year. Long-term rates have already come down. And then, the investment flow the spigot will open up again. So that's another piece I would say that I'm seeing out there.
Cool.
Hopefulness.
That's great to hear. Barnaby, thank you. My last question for you is, what do you do for fun?
I have a long list of things I do for fun. I love to cook. I've always been into food. Born and raised in New York City, and sort of my family really embraced the multicultural culinary aspects of the city, and I've traveled and lived in a bunch of parts of the world. And I like to say that cooking is the only perfect art form, because it is the only art form that uses all of the human senses of taste, sight, sound, even the crunch, obviously the smell, all of that matters. So I just, and it's infinite, right? There's always something new to try, to learn, and it is a great way of connecting with people and spending time and learning. And it's a little bit also, I think, because we eat every day, multiple times a day as humans typically, it's kind of like the ability, one of the things I love about working on the web is the ability to run experiments, A/B tests, right? If you've got enough traffic, you think it should be a round button, I think it should be a square button. Let's just, let's A/B test it, and whoever's right is right. Well, in my family, I try a dish and everybody hates it, I'm maybe not going to do it again. Or maybe everybody's like, well, just lay off the garlic, or whatever it is, like, try it again. Oh, everybody loves it. It's got that same sort of opportunity for experimentation and learning that's multidimensional that I enjoy.
Awesome. Barnaby, thank you very much for your time today and the wisdom and all of the journey that you shared. Deeply appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.